Good afternoon, and welcome to the workshop on how to apply to the CURCA Student Faculty Collaborative mini grants. My name is Diogo Pinheiro. I am the Assistant Director for CURCA. And with me here today is Alison Grandal, who is the Program Coordinator for CURCA. And so we're going to go over some of the details of how to apply, the materials that you have to submit, and then at the end, we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A. So, uh, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about CURCA, right? So, CURCA is the Center for Undergraduate Research and Creative Activities, and we support undergraduate research and creative initiatives in all 5 campuses. We help students pair up with mentors. We help with funding through the mini grants initiative, through the travel grants initiative, through Fuse, right? We have annual research conferences. We recognize people with awards. And so we are involved in all different sorts of parts of the undergraduate research experience, right? We don't mentor the research directly, but everything else we play a part in, right? And so today we're going to be talking about the mini grants program that we have. And so the first question that we often field is, oh, can I use a mini grant for this? Can I use a mini grant for that? Right? And so uh, the mini grants here are used to support undergraduate research, and we have a very broad definition of undergraduate research. Undergraduate research is going to be an inquiry or exploration conducted and disseminated by an undergraduate student that makes an intellectual or creative contribution to the discipline and to applied practice, right? And here I want to emphasize it's not just research in the traditional sense of, you at a lab playing around with different reagents, right? We cover all fields. And so if you're in music, if you're in theater, if you're in film, right, it will also fall under this umbrella here because those are creative activities, right? So the mini grants program is a student-led program, meaning that the students will write and apply for the funding, right? In other words, it's not your mentor that's supposed to be writing the grant. It's not your professor. It's supposed to be the student. It's supposed to be you, the student, who is writing the application and applying for funding, right? So we cover all different majors. We cover all different fields. And the thing that we want is that there has to be some sort of creative research or contribution, and that the process be student-led, right? So let's talk a little bit about the application process, right? Much like everything else that we do at CURCA, you would apply for the mini grants through InfoReady, right? We have details about the process at our website. If you go to the ung.edu/CURCA, and you go under the For Students button, you will see the Student Faculty Collaborative mini grants. And in there, you can find our requests for proposals, the rubric that our reviewers will use, and a button to take you to InfoReady, where you would apply under the 2025 Student Faculty Collaborative mini grants competition, right? And so you can find the basic information on our website, but you would apply for it through InfoReady. And one thing that's important to keep in mind is that once you apply through InfoReady, if you've submitted everything correctly, you should get an email confirmation at the end saying that the application is in, right? If you've done a bunch of stuff and you don't get that email, maybe you forgot to hit submit, maybe something went wrong, so go back and check. So let's talk a little bit about the mini grants, right? So with the mini grants, we can provide you with up to $1,000 to spend in the conduct of research, right? In other words, it can be money that's spent on lab materials, on cameras and film, on computer software, if it's allowed, right? We have a process to make sure that the specifics of the software are allowed. And we have to purchase everything through UNG, and everything that is purchased will be property of UNG. In other words, if you end up requesting a particular bit of equipment, at the end of the project, that equipment should stay behind as property of UNG, right? You don't get to take it home and keep it forever. The deadline is September 26th at the end of the day. And after that, we'll kind of get together with our reviewers and have the decisions completed by mid to late October, right? So for students, what you need to do is, first of all, you have to work closely with your mentor, right? We're going to give you the money, but it's not just for you to do whatever you want, right? It's for you to do research alongside with your mentor under the guidance of your mentor. And we expect of you to present your research, the outcome of the research project that we funded, at either our annual research conference, which happens every spring, or some other uh, uh, disciplinary conference, right? Maybe something that's specific to your discipline, so on, to make sure that you've actually done stuff and that it's something that is contributing to your discipline, right? And then eventually you're going to have to submit a post-award report showing all that you've done, all the money that was spent, and so on and so forth. So the way that we decide who's going to get these mini grants is that we have reviewers who are working with us, and these reviewers are from all different disciplines. So they're not necessarily going to be from your field, from your major, right? They're from all different disciplines. And so we're going to give them the proposals. We're going to give them the rubric that we have that you can see on the InfoReady website, and they're going to score these proposals based on that rubric, right? And then once we have those numerical scores, we get together, we go over the rankings, and then the proposals with the highest scores will be funded, right? So here is the first bit of advice that I can give you, right? Remember that the faculty who will be grading your applications come from all sorts of disciplines. So you have to write your applications with a general audience in mind, right? You write something that's full of jargon, super full of hyper-specific stuff to your discipline, and someone who is not from your discipline may not understand, may not be able to get what it is that you're trying to do, right? So when you're writing those proposals, when you're writing the narrative of your project, make sure that you're writing thinking about people who may not necessarily be familiar with your project, may not necessarily be familiar with your field, right? And so in terms of the specific parts of your application, you're going to have to submit uh, 3 different things and then do this other thing that's going to be online, right? So the first and main thing that you're going to have to submit is a proposal narrative where you're going to describe the things that you want to do with funding and with the money that we're going to provide, the details of your research project or creative project. You would have to submit a budget where you describe where you want to spend that money on. You need to submit a mentor support letter, and this mentor support letter would be a faculty member saying that, yes, I am interested and willing to support and to work with this student on this project. And then there's going to be a bunch of certifications that are going to be on the InfoReady platform where you would say that, yes, this is your own work and so on and so forth, right? So let's go into the details of each of these components of the application. The main thing is going to be the narrative. And for the narrative, you are limited to 3 pages maximum. That is exclusive of references, right? So in other words, you can write 3 pages and go over the 3 pages for the references, but the narrative itself has to be 3 pages at the most. It has to be Times New Roman 12-point font, 1-inch margins, single space, right? So don't try to play around with that to make it seem shorter or longer. And this narrative will have aims and objectives, goals and expected products, methodology and background, significance and rationale, impact on your career, timeline, and then, of course, the references, right? If you are kind of unsure of how to do things, on our InfoReady page, we provide you with a Word template that you can use to create your own proposal, right? So in other words, if you're kind of unsure of how to format things, if you're not quite sure of how to structure your application, download this template that's going to be on the info ready page and use that as the basis for your proposal, right? And so that the idea here is that if your proposal is well written and it's well organized, right? One of the things that the template will do is have specific sections alongside what's supposed to go in each section. It will be easier for our reviewers to see what you're trying to do and to grade accordingly. So let's talk about each of these elements on the narrative, right? So for the aims and objectives part, we want you to describe what is your project, what is the creative activity, right? What is the step-by-step kind of process that you want to undergo, right? So here it's going to be like, this is what I want to write about. This is what I want to research. Here's how I'm going to research it. This is why this is relevant. This is why this is important for my discipline, right? So write it in a way that is scholarly, but that can be understood by general audiences, right? So this here is what is your project? Why is it important part of your narrative, right? The next section is the goals and expected products. And here we're talking about things in a very concrete way, right? What do you want to have at the end of the mini grant period? Are you hoping to have a publication? Are you hoping to have a presentation? And if you are hoping to have a presentation, is it going to be a presentation at ARC, at a regional conference, at a national conference, an exhibit, a play if you're in theater, something along those lines, right? Like what's going to be the tangible thing that's going to be the result of this research project, right? And so the difference here between a goal and an expected product, right, is that the goal is you want to understand something, you want to explore something, you want to answer a particular research question, and then the product is going to be we hope to present at a national conference for my discipline. We hope to present at a regional conference for my discipline, something along those lines, right? So in this part of the proposal of the narrative, this is what you would focus on. Next, it would be the methodology and background, right? What specifically will you be doing, right? What is the name of the method? How is it done? What are the tools that you need to do them? What is the equipment necessary that you need to do them? What training do you have to be able to do this, right? Maybe you've taken the class that teaches you how to do this. Maybe you've done this before, all right? And make sure that here you're not just kind of guessing and picking things at random. Make sure that you're adhering to the kind of scholarly ways that have been used in your discipline, right? So here it's the kind of step-by-step methodology that you're going to be using and kind of what you need to do it and your experience, your training, the classes that you've taken that kind of make it so that it is realistic for you to do this, right? Be concise here, be reasonable, right? Don't say, oh, I'm going to create a mini nuclear reactor on campus with this $1,000, right? And be sure to kind of reference what is the standard in their field. And if you're not going to be doing this standard in your field, make sure that you explain why, right? And make this in context of the goals that you have, right? Of what you're hoping to learn, how this method is appropriate for the goals that you have. Next is going to be significance and rationale, right? It's going to be about how this particular project fits into the bigger debates in your field, right? Is this part of an ongoing project that you've been a part of? Is this new? And how does this fit with kind of the state of the art in your field, right? Why is this important? Why is this? And this was where, while you would mention importance early on, this is where you would really kind of dig down on this part of your narrative, right? So if you're trying to write a paper about or do a project about controlling some sort of past, you mentioned, oh my God, it would save so much money, right? And so the idea here is again that you're showing the reviewers that this is something that's important, that it's not just like a hobby, it's something that can have real consequences, right? Next, and the most important part of your application is the impact on your student career, on your education, on your long-term plans, right? This part is worth twice as much as the other parts of your application, according to our rubric. And so here, the idea is, how is this going to help you get to where you want to go, right? Oh, I want to go to graduate school. I want to become a scientist. I want to work in this field. How does this mini grant help you get to that place that you're trying to get to, right? And here, the more specific, the better, right? Here, the more clear you are on what you're hoping to do long term, the more kind of influence it will have on our reviewers. And then, of course, last but not least, the timeline, right? Provide us with a timeline of your project. It does not have to be a perfect timeline. It does not have to be like, oh, day 2, this is what I'm going to do. But it has to be something that shows us that your project is realistic under the timeline that we have, right? You're going to have a year to spend this money, right? Can this project be done within that year, right? Or is this something that would be unrealistic for us to be able to expect to complete within a year? So by providing a timeline here, right? Oh, October, we would do this. November, we would do this, et cetera, and then making sure that it's a reasonable timeline, the reviewers will be more able to see what you're trying to do, right? So once again, there is a rubric that you can see on InfoReady and on our website. It looks like the one that you can see on your screen. And uh, it is very important to write thinking about this rubric, because the way that we evaluate this is going to be we're going to give the proposals to our reviewers, and we're going to give the rubric to our reviewers, and that's that, right? The reviewers will only be evaluating what's written down in the proposal, and will do so only looking at what is in the rubric, right? Imagine, for example, that you write a proposal that's full of jargon. Our reviewers are not going to be Googling to figure out what that jargon means and trying to understand it and kind of fill in the blanks, right? They're only going by what's in your proposal, and they're scoring according to this rubric. So it is very important to write to the scoring rubric, right? Make sure that you're respecting formatting guidelines. Make sure that you're writing the proposal in a way that our reviewers will understand it without having to Google anything, right? Be specific in your timeline. Make sure that that you make it so that the reviewers can see that you're excited about this. And again, the most important thing of all, how is this going to kind of boost your career? How is this going to make you get to where you want to go long term for your career, right? It is okay for you to get feedback from your mentor at every step of the way, but at the end of the day, it's very important to understand this, that it is you who are supposed to write this proposal, right? We've had issues in the past where a proposal was written from the point of view of a mentor, and it was clearly written by a mentor. Don't make that mistake, right? This is supposed to be written by the student from the point of view of the student, even if they do get a lot of feedback from their mentor, right? So this is going to be the narrative in the 3 pages. Besides the narrative, you have to submit a budget. The budget should be as detailed as possible, right? What are the items that you need? What are the vendor that you're trying to get them from? What is the quantity and price, include shipping, include taxes, include the total cost. If there's a link, even better. Make sure that you add the date by which you need these sorts of things, right? And once you get this, we'll work with you closely to make sure that you understand what's allowable and what's not allowable. But it is important to keep in mind that mini grants are not to be used for conference travel. Right, for that we have the travel grants program. You can use it for travel if it is travel to conduct research, but even then we would have to work with you to make sure that it's allowable. You cannot use it to pay for food, and some types of incentives cannot be covered, right? Incentives that involve some sort of lottery, etc. Generally, those cannot be covered, right? So we can cover incentives, but we would have to work with you to make sure that they fall under state regulations. And then for software, it's going to have to be approved by our IT department, and it's going to have to be something that, as we said, stays behind for UNG. So we would not be able to, for example, pay for an individual license in the name of the student, right? It would have to be something in the name of UNG that maybe stays at the UNG computer, something along those lines. But once again, we would work with you to make sure that all the expenditure is allowable. And then the mentor letter, you're going to request a support letter from your mentor. That letter is supposed to include the mentor's relationship to you. Are they your advisor? Have they been your professor? That sort of stuff. Whether your professor thinks that you are ready to complete the research, right? So in other words, they have to comment on your preparedness for this. Their plan on how they're going to oversee the research. A statement that acknowledges that the student is the primary author of the application, and a statement that the mentor is going to work with us to make sure that materials being bought and etc. are being used in an appropriate way and stored in an appropriate way, right? The mentor letter is supposed to be 2 pages max, and it's supposed to include these elements. And then the certifications, they're going to be all done via digital signature on InfoReady, right? So once you've uploaded all that sort of stuff, there's going to be a bunch of questions where we're going to ask you to certify certain things, right? So first of all, and perhaps the most important of all, is a certification that the materials that you're submitting are your own work. So you're not supposed to submit work by someone else, by your professor, by a colleague, etc. You're submitting your own work. You're going to certify that you're willing to present at a conference, that you're going to submit the report at the end of your grant period. There's going to be a section there regarding IRB requirements, right? If you're doing research with human subjects, you're going to have to get IRB approval, and we will only be able to pay for certain things after you've obtained the IRB approval. There's going to be a certification that you acknowledge that you understand that all funds must be spent by March 31st of next year, and that research is going to be overseen by mentor, and that you're going to comply with UNG and USG regulations. So to wrap this up, deadline September 26th, so not this Friday, but next Friday. 3-page proposal narrative, budget, mentor support letter, all acknowledgments and certifications, right? If at any point you have a question that was not covered in this workshop, make sure that you ask us about it, right? You can ask us about it after this workshop or through our email or any of these different ways. So thank you so much, and we're going to stop recording now, and then you can ask any questions that you might have.